Today, I'd like to dedicate all the words of Torah that I'm going to say to the memory of Lucy Maya and Rina D. Zichronam Livracha, Hashem Yikom Damam. I was privileged that they were not just my neighbors, but they were very special people in their life, and I was privileged to know them, and their terrible murder happened today. Lucy died 2 days later. She succumbed to her wounds, but basically everything started today, and I don't think I was the same after that. I don't think anyone can be the same after it. It just hit home literally, because we're talking about a neighbor and we're also talking about friends, but we're also talking about a human tragedy on the highest level. So with your permission, I'll dedicate all the words of Torah to their memory. So this morning in davening, we laned, as we do on Pesach every day, a different laning. And of course today, part of the laning was about the SEFIRAT-HAOMER, because we started last night to count the Omer. And indeed, when you look at the psukim that we read this morning, it seems like the period of the Omer starts with a korban and ends with a korban. It doesn't say in the psukim that we start on the second day of Pesach and we end on Shavuos. Those words do not appear, as you can see. But rather what it says is, Ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem u'ktzartem et ktsira. When you come back to Israel and you're able to cut down the wheat, v'havetem et omer reshit tzrichem el hakohen. You bring the Omer sacrifice, obviously from barley, to the Kohen. After you go ahead and do that on the second day of Pesach. Usfartem lachem imocharat Shabbat miyom haviachem et haomer. From the day you bring this Omer sacrifice, you start counting to God for 7 weeks. When the 7 weeks are up, 49 days, what do? Once again, v'hikarftem mincha chadasha laHashem. You bring a new offering to God. What's the offering you bring on the 50th day? Mimoshavotechem taviu lechem tenufa, what we colloquially call the shtei halechem. So if you've ever been in a home where on Shavuos they make franks in the blankets, it's because it reminds us of the shtei halechem. You know, not only do you have the challah on the table, you have another piece of meat with bread, because there was a double loaf that was brought as a sacrifice on Shavuos. And then it says, Ukratem be'etzem hayom hazeh, on that day that you bring this shtei halechem, it's a mikra kodesh, it's a holiday. So the words SEFIRAT-HAOMER and Shavuos doesn't appear here. In the psukim, all there is a sandwich. On the one hand, you have a barley sacrifice called the Omer. On the other hand, you have a chametz sacrifice called the shtei halechem. And the psukim are very clear that the second sacrifice has to be from chametz. So literally, we just entered Pesach. We are just into the prohibition of not eating chametz. And on the second day of Pesach, God already tells us that on 49 days from now, minus a few hours, you're going to bring not only a sacrifice, but chametz te'afena. It has to be a chametz sacrifice. Now, I'll be honest with you. Most sacrifices in the temple were not chametz. All year. There are very few that have chametz. When you bring a toda sacrifice, you bring with it a bunch of breads. Some of them are chametz, some of them are not. That's one of the reasons why over Chol HaMoed Pesach we don't say Mizmor Letoda, because Mizmor Letoda reminds us of the Toda sacrifice, which was brought with chametz, and you don't say it on a day that's prohibited by chametz. In addition to which, when a Nazir finishes his Nazirite period, either a man or a woman, they have to bring a bunch of korbanot. Part of them have chametz, but in general, the Beis HaMikdash was chametz free. The third example is this: on Shavuos, real chametz. So it's interesting that we're on the holiday of Pesach, which we connect to the holiday of Shavuos via the SEFIRAT-HAOMER, and one of them no chametz, and the other one dafka chametz. And I'd like to understand why, because the Ramban is very clear when he says that this period of time, if he can sum it up in a very succinct way, he says, "She'atchil lispor betchilat ktsir se'orim." You start counting when you harvest the barley. V'yavi reshit ktsiro karmel mincha laHashem. Part of it you bring to God, a very small part of it. V'yakriv alav korban, and you bring other sacrifices with it. V'yashlim misparo, and finally, after 49 days, we're going to stop this period of time by bringing a ktsir chitim, by bringing a sacrifice from wheat. So one is barley, one is wheat, and that's basically the story of SEFIRAT-HAOMER in the Torah. And my question is, why did God go ahead and say, start with barley and end with wheat? Interesting question. The answer is, I have no idea. And I'll tell you why, because I wasn't on the editorial board of the Torah. When God wrote the Torah, he didn't consult with Grunstein. And I don't know why. I really don't know why. Now I'm going to try to knock some human sense into it based on my understanding, but I could be totally wrong. But I'm going to try to knock some sense into it. In our tradition, wheat and barley have two different categories. Barley is always considered the most low-life, repulsive food that we have. It's called a ma'achal behema. No more,
Really?
no less.
Why?
Even though we put it in the chulent,
Yeah.
we think barley is barley. When it comes to
Liquor's
barley,
made from barley, isn't
Pardon?
it? A lot of liquor is made from
a lot of
barley,
liquor is
isn't
made
it?
from barley, right? Whiskey and beer. But in our tradition, barley is considered something you give under
Yeah.
bad circumstances when people did not live up to their human dignity. The best example is the sota. The sota in the Torah, who maybe or maybe not was not faithful to her husband, when she goes through that whole ceremony in the Beis Hamikdash, comes along the pasuk and says that amongst many things, "Ve'hevia ishet ishto el hakohen," you bring your wife to the kohen, "Ve'heviet korbana aleha," and you bring a korban for her on her behalf, "Asirit haifa kemach seorim." You bring from not wheat flour, but from barley flour. Comes along the Yerushalmi and says, "Meshalchin chitim shehen ma'achal asisiyot, seorin shehen ma'achal behema." Once again, the Yerushalmi says barley is a ma'achal behema. The Gemara in Masechet Sota explains why do we bring a barley sacrifice for a sota? Keshem shema'aseh ma'aseh behema. She wasn't faithful to her husband, and she unfortunately, maybe, excuse the expression, slept around a little bit. So too, kach korbana ma'achal behema. You acted like an animal, you get a sacrifice that's fit for an animal, and that's what Rashi
But
says.
this is even before she's proven innocent.
Correct.
or
This is
guilty.
all alleged. This is all alleged. Correct. Hopefully she's proven wrong, and the husband is berated for what he thought, and we move on. But I'm saying, if God forbid she did that, then basically we treat her and say, hey, you weren't living up to your dignity as a human being. That's it. You're going to be treated like an animal. An animal gets seorim, gets barley. Look on the left side of the sheet, the Sefer HaChinuch, which, unlike me who says I have no idea why God said this or that, he actually did write Ta'amei HaMitzvot. He wrote a beautiful book. By the way, we don't know who he is to this day. We know he's one of the Rishonim. There's various, I would say, theories who he is, but we don't know who he is. And his book is amazing because he writes the mitzvah, a few of the details, then he writes the reasons, and it's a pleasure to read. Especially when you get a book of Sefer HaChinuch with the nikudot. Then it's really a pleasure to read. I have one at home. It's very well used. I actually got it through marriage because my wife gave it to me when we got married. It was hers from high school, and that's the one I use. I learned it with my kids. I love that one because it has nikudot. It's such a pleasure to read. It's not hard Hebrew, it's easy Hebrew. And he says like this, Mishorshei HaMitzvah, why is it that we have a mitzvah on Shavuos to bring a sacrifice which is chametz and from wheat? Ki mipnei shayta mitzvah bechitim liot hamincha bekikarot shelechem lefi hashichei hachitim lema'achal adam. A human being eats wheat. Matzah is made out of wheat. It could be made out of 4 other grains. I personally like to eat matzah made out of spelt because it doesn't change the sugar in your body. But, quite frankly, the regular matzah that you found at breakfast today was from wheat. That's a ma'achal adam. So, if I could sum up what we just saw, we go from barley to wheat, we go from a ma'achal behema to a ma'achal adam. We go to a food fit for an animal to a food fit to a human being. That's the 49-day count. We start with food fit for an animal, and we end with food fit for a human being. That's what our tradition seems to say. If that is the case, comes along the Sfat Emet, one of the Gera Rebbes, and he said, "The Omer Seorim Ma'achal Be'ema V'Shtei Halechem Ma'achar Adam, V'Akravat HaMincha Hu HaEmunah V'Ha'achna'a LaHashem Yitbarach L'Hodia Ki HaKol Shalo." Ultimately, why do we start with barley? Because an animal doesn't think. An animal doesn't contemplate. An animal doesn't rethink. What does an animal do? An animal runs program, as we like to say. What does that mean? An animal doesn't change from day to day. He doesn't decide one day I'm going on a diet. An animal basically knows 2 things. Yes, sir, or no, sir. Either he listens or he doesn't listen. That's an animal. When we left Mitzrayim, says the Sfat Emet, B'tchilat Yetziat Mitzrayim Katuv, Va'at Arum Veria. You were basically totally, excuse the expression, naked from mitzvot, which means there was not much there. You were slaves. You were used to, for 200-something years, to say yes, sir, or no, sir. That's it. So basically, you were like an animal. And therefore, right at the beginning of Pesach, when we're still coming out of Mitzrayim, we eat, or to be more precise, we sacrifice a ma'achal behema, barley. But, says the Sfat Emet, 49 days later we got to Har Sinai. What happened at Har Sinai? God gave us the Torah. What did the Jewish people say when God gave the Torah and offered them the Torah? Which means, we'll do, like a good slave will do, but now we're going to add something. Nishma. We're going to learn it. We're going to question it. We're going to critique. We are going to contemplate. And therefore, on that holiday where we got the Torah, we go up a notch from a ma'achal behema to a ma'achal adam, from barley to wheat. That's what the Sfat Emet says. Now, therefore, he says, at the end of Mincha on Shabbos, there's usually a passage called Tzidkotcha Tzedek. In that passage of Tzidkotcha Tzedek, it ends with the words, Adam uvehima toshia Hashem. Both an animal and a human being will get salvation from God, which means that we need both. On the one hand, the na'aseh, as you said, we need to say yes, sir, whether we understand the mitzvah or not, we do it. We benched this morning after breakfast because God said so. I don't know if I really understood why. But, nishma, we should also learn it and critique it and ask questions on it. We need both. Now, every time I see a perush like this, I always want to know, is he the only one that says it? Because if it's just a Gera Rebbe that said this, that's nice, but I'd like to look for someone else. So I looked within our traditions. Is there anyone else that say it? And lo and behold, Rav Kook says exactly the same words. Lefikach mechubar Pesach la'atzeret ayidei Sefirata-HAOMER shebebeit hamikdash. We connect Pesach to Shavuos via the Sefirata-HAOMER. Shehi mechaberet et minchat ha'seorim machal behema el achitim. We connect the barley to the wheat. Ma'achal adam ha'elui v'asechli v'aruchani. U'shnei ha'kachot ha'yesodiyim ha'elu megalim et kol meloer kamu fu'ulatam. When you have both, you are a complete Jew. We need barley and we need wheat. On the one hand, we have to say to God, yes, sir, we'll do what you said. But we're not going to just say that. We're going to say, but God, we're going to learn why. And when you learn why, you're going to ask questions and you're going to critique. And I hate to say this, it's even called something in our tradition. Have you ever heard the term milchamta shel Torah? A war for the sake of Torah? That's not a jihad. A war for the sake of Torah means you go into a beis medrash and two Jews who are very good friends are learning, and they're screaming at each other and yelling and shouting and cursing. And then afterwards they go to lunch together as if nothing happened. Not like the Knesset. That's all fakerai when they scream and yell. And then at the miznon of the Knesset, they go ahead and they love each other. I'm talking about in the beis medrash. We want to get to the truth. So when you get to the truth, sometimes it's hard, and you scream and you yell and you shout, and I want to understand the Gemara, I want to understand what the Chumash says. And then you're the best of friends. So basically, says both Rav Kook and Sfat Emet, independent of each other, we need both. On the one hand, we need to say to God, even if we don't understand, we're going to do it. And number two, that's not enough. Let's knock some sense into it and try to understand and enhance what we're doing via learning Torah, via asking hard questions, via, when you ask hard questions, you question your faith. And that's part and parcel of being a Jew. And therefore, the Sefirata-HAOMER, if you think about it, starts with a slave that all he knows how to say is yes, sir, or he gets killed, to becoming a human being that asks questions. That's basically the Sefirata-HAOMER. In order to prove my point, let's turn the page and see if I'm right. So let's go to the second event. We're now on Pesach. We know we were slaves. We got out of Egypt. So let's go to the event 49 days later. We all know we got to the bottom of Har Sinai. Moshe goes up to Har Sinai. You see the psukim. God says, listen, I did all these things to you. I got an offer. Remember the offer? V'atem tiyu li, and please be for me. Mamlechet kohanim vegoy kadosh. Be for me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. How does the Jewish people answer that wonderful proposition? They say Naaseh. Eventually they say Naaseh v'nishma, right? When you read the psukim in Parshat Yitro, which is on the top of the source sheet, and then Parshat Mishpatim, which fills in a little bit at the end of it. You know, Parshat Mishpatim is very boring. There's a lot of mitzvot. At the end is like a story that's filled in from Har Sinai. That's the story where it says that when the Jewish people saw God, they decided the most appropriate, suitable thing is to eat and drink. From here we learned that every Jewish holiday, with the exception of Yom Kippur, is eating and drinking. Right? Anyway, you should know, by the way, this is not the shir. There's a machloket between Rashi and the Ramban if they did the right thing. Rashi said it was terrible what they did. God should have killed them. What do you mean? You look at God and the first thing you do is you eat? Yom Kippur is the holiest day. You're standing before God. You don't eat and drink. And the Ramban says, no, they did the right thing. From here we learn every time you finish something, you do a siyum. And you make a party and you eat and drink. So it's an interesting way to interpret those psukim. To make a long story short, from our perspective, when you read the Torah, it seems like the Jewish people willingly accepted the Torah. They said, Na'aseh v'nishma. They got a proposition from God. Moshe brought it down. They said yes. And then Moshe said to God, hey, got good news for you. They said yes. Works out very beautifully, right? That's in the Torah. Then you go to the Gemara, and you get a totally and utterly different picture. The Gemara quotes on the left side of the page the pasuk Vayotze Moshe et ha'am likrat ha'Elohim min ha'machaneh vayityatzvu betachtit ha'har. It doesn't say Moshe went ahead and went to Har Sinai, Vayelech Moshe. It says Vayotze. What's Vayotze? Modern Hebrew. What does it mean, lehotzi?
To take something out.
To take something out. Ani motzi et ha'pelephone min hatik means I'm taking the telephone out of the bag. So Vayotze Moshe et ha'am means he had to forcefully take them to Har Sinai. So the old story is they slept late. He had to wake them up. Hey guys, Har Sinai today, right? That was the story that justifies why people stay up all night. They don't want to make that mistake again, right? Well, the Gemara doesn't bring that story. You know what the Gemara brings? It brings the following story. Moshe had to forcefully take them out of bed because they didn't want to receive the Torah. They had second thoughts. Finally, they got to the bank of the Sinai, of the Mount Sinai. Amar Rav Dimi bar Chama, said Rav Dimi the son of Chama, Melamed. This teaches Shekifa Kadosh Baruch Hu Har Kegigita Yisrael. God picked up the mountain, held it over the Jewish people, and gave them the following quote-unquote proposition. Im atem mekablim et haTorah mutav. If you accept the Torah, great. V'im lav, and if not, sham tiyeh kfuratchem. Well, what would you answer to that proposition?
Yeah, okay, I'll take it.
I'll take it, no problem, right? Listen, you got two choices. You know, there's a story I think about the Nodabi Yehuda, the Shagasaya, I forgot who. There was a husband that was a get refuser, which is a terrible thing. Didn't start today. Your daughter deals with that? That's just my wife. She deals with divorce?
A little bit.
A little bit.
More, less so. She does more now, inheritance and things like that.
So I'm going to quote something from a rabbi I greatly respect, Rabbi Safran. He was once with me on a Pesach program, and he wrote a tiny article. I don't have the article, tiny, like one page. He says he doesn't understand why good Jews get married like B'nai Torah, but get divorced like terrorists. Yeah. And then he wrote a whole article how you should get divorced, and then he ends. And I'm not saying this just to say it. I went through it. My wife and I, things weren't working out. We went to therapy. The minute the therapy didn't work, I went to the Beis Din. I said, I'd like to give a get. We'll work out all the division of property later. That's what a Jew should do. And it took the Beis Din a week to get their act together, but I gave a get right away. So I always quote him when I talk about divorce because I think he's 100% correct. How do we get married like good Jews, but don't get divorced like good Jews? They're both mitzvot in the Torah. In any case, if you have a get refuser, and he really refuses to give a get, plus it's a situation which justifies forcing him, what do? You force him. You tie him up to a post, you start beating him, and you tell him, listen, you got two choices. You give a get or we'll beat you. So usually he says yes. In Israel, we have a little bit of that. They changed the law in Israel, and you could, for a get refuser, put him in jail. Take away his license, his passport, and if that doesn't work, they changed the law further, you can put him in solitary confinement. There's a story in Israel of two big get refusers for years. They were in jail, they didn't give a get. Took away their passport, license, nothing. Finally, they changed the law with the solitary confinement. They put him into solitary. One gave a get after 24 hours, the other after 36 hours. My word of honor, I wanted to know, how come one guy took 36 hours and one 24 hours? I got the answer. One was an Ashkenazi. He did the 24 hours. The other was a Teimani. The Teimanim, God bless them, they were very stubborn. That's the way they remained Jewish. So they're stubborn to the end. It took them 36 hours. Anyway, back to our story. There's a story about the Nolde Yehuda.
So there should be no more women who are...
Definitely in Israel, we have, in many ways, not solved the problem, but gone very far.
Mm-hmm.
We at SOAR have a prenup agreement. That helps. We, of course, have this law. Outside of Israel, it's much harder because only Jews can do that to Jews. You can't have non-Jews do that to Jews. So to make a long story short, either the Nolde Yehuda, the Shagas Aryeh had a get refuser. And they went up to the husband and said, you got two choices. The Gemara says you can get divorced in two ways. Beget uvemitat Baal. Either you give a get or you're going to drop dead. Take your choice. The guy spat at the rabbi, says, what do you know? Walks away. He died in a week. Got a heart attack, died in a week. So I guess if you're the Nolde Yehuda, the Shagas Aryeh, you can pull that off. So God can pull that off. He held the mountain over us and he forced us to get the Torah. So in the Psukim, it seems like a proposition. We decided willingly in our freedom of choice to receive it. And by the way, it's not just in the Torah. The Mechilta, part of our Chazal, say that that's what happened too. In the Mechilta, it says, Vayit yatzvu, nitzfafu. Vayit yatzvu betachtit tahar means they were standing very close to one another. Me'amet shayu Yisrael mitrayin, mipnei hazikin, mipnei hazmaot, mipnei haramim, mipnei habrakim habaim. Apparently, the day they got to Torah Shavuos, it was a day of thunder, lightning, and shofar blowing, and they were scared. They were scared. It was a Steven Spielberg extravaganza. They were scared. So what happens betachtit tahar? It's not that God held the mountain over them, according to the Mechilta. Melamet shenitlash ahar mimkomo. God took the mountain away from where it was. Vikirvo v'amdo tachat ahar, and he put it over their heads, and he basically said, don't worry about the thunder and the lightning and the shofar blowing. I'm protecting you. It's like an umbrella on a rainy day. So we see that even in Chazal, there's two opposite descriptions of what happened on that day. One description is they got the Torah by force, and the other is by freedom of choice. To add to it, there's a Midrash Tanchuma that says, B'sha'ah shamdu Yisrael al Har Sinai, hishvu kulan lev echad, lekabel alehem malchut shamayim b'simcha. When they stood on their Mount Sinai, they all stood together in great joy to receive the Torah with one heart. So beautiful. And quite frankly, my question is, which is correct? And the answer the Maharal gives is, they are both correct. Namely, if you educate the next generation and say, listen, when the Torah fits into your schedule, do it. But if it's inconvenient or you don't agree with it, don't do it. Then we have a problem, because we're not going to ensure that the Torah will continue in the next generation. On the other hand, if you just force your children and grandchildren to do the Torah, it also won't endure. Why would you want to do everything by force? Says the Maharal in a beautiful way, Mashekafa le'em ahar on the left side, Shelo yamru Yisrael anachnu kibalnu haTorah me'atzmeinu, v'him lo hayinu rotzim, lo hayinu mekablim haTorah. That God gave it to us by freedom of choice, and quite frankly, if we didn't want to receive it by freedom of choice, we wouldn't receive it. Lefikach in ra'ush tiyeh kabbalat Torah b'bchirat Yisrael. God forbid, a Jew's going to say, listen, Pesach's not convenient for me this year. I'll do it next year. By the way, these are apparently true. Did I tell you the story about Halifax with the Seder? There was a lovely family in Halifax from the conservative synagogue, and we got very friendly with them, and we invited them to one of our Seders.
Oh, right.
And they said, it's not convenient this year. It's a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, I forgot. We'll do it in 2 weeks on Saturday night. Well, that is why sometimes the Torah has to be by force. On those days when it's inconvenient, indeed, it's by force. You don't sleep good at night. You have to wake up for davening. It's by force. On the other hand, says the Maharal, Umikol Makol, Acharei Echrach Kabbalat Gzerat HaMelech on the right side, once you say, okay, the Torah obligates me, whether I like it or not, Matov U'Manaim, how beautiful and how nice it is, and even better, basically, says the Maharal, we need both. We need to, on the one hand, say, listen, the Torah is not an option. It demands and commands obedience sometimes. On the other hand, don't leave it at that. You should make it part and parcel of who you are by learning it, by asking, by answering, by seeking out questions, because without it, it's going to be like doing the Torah as a trained monkey. You stand up, you sit down, you take the Kiddush cup, you recline, you chew. you need both. In my language, we need barley and we need wheat. We need barley like a good slave that says yes sir, no sir, like an animal. But on the other hand, we need wheat in the sense of that we need to also be a human being that has a brain that asks why and how. I finally saw this come to fore at an airport. At an airport. After 9/11, I don't have to tell you that all of a sudden airports became very not dangerous places that the minute you walk in, they suspect you. And everything in your handbag is an endangered species, right? Take off your shoes, take off your belt, take out any sprays, take out any liquids. We all do it, like a good yes sir, no sir, barley. But after we get through security, I hope one of us is going to ask one of the ladies there, hey, why do you make me take out my soap, my shampoo? What could it do? And the shoes. And why did you ask me to take off my kippah to see what's under it? Because if not, we're just like animals. On the other hand, if we question even before doing it, they'll arrest us. So I think that a complete Jew does both. We, on the one hand, have to say we're like a behemah, literally, that we have to just do with obedience. But on the other hand, it's not enough. Therefore, the holiday of Pesach is connected to the holiday of Shavuos. And I keep on coming back to this throughout Pesach, but I think it's true. You cannot drink between the third cup of wine and the fourth cup of wine. The third cup of wine is the physical emergence from Mishnah. Namely, V'holtzeti v'hitzalti v'ga'alti. Thank you. And I have redeemed you from Egypt, physically. Now you're out of Egypt. You're not slaves anymore. Not enough. The fourth cup of wine. I'm going to make you my nation, which means now you're part and parcel of the Torah world. You can ask questions. You can give concerns to the extent that once the Torah was given, God says, I'm all out. There's a famous story in Bava Metzia, Daf Nun Tet, called Tanuro Shel Achna. You ever hear of it? So there was this oven. And the question is, does the oven become impure if you have an oven that breaks and you glue it together? Now, a full kli, let's say this cell phone cover, can get tuma. Theoretically, it can become impure. If it's not a kli, it's just broken up pieces, it doesn't. So what happens if you have broken up pieces that you glue together? It looks awful, like a mug, a coffee mug that you try to glue together, but together it is. Doesn't look like a kli anymore. So there was a big machlokas in the Gemara. One of the deot in the Gemara says, I'll prove to you that I'm right. And he brings all these heavenly signs. If I'm right, let there be thunder. There was thunder. If I'm right, let there be lightning. There's lightning. And guess what? The rabbis basically said, we can care less. Lo bashamayim hi. The Torah is no longer up there, it's down here. So at the end of that story, the Gemara says that Eliyahu Hanavi, or someone, went to God and said, no, what do you think of what your children just did to you? They basically told you to butt out. God answers, Nitzchuni banai. Nitzchuni banai. My children won. I gave them the Torah, I'm all out. Now it's up to them. In other words, we have to be part and parcel of the Torah. We can't be outsiders to the Torah, which means that yes, we have to obey the word of God, but no, it doesn't stop at that. We need barley and we need wheat. And I'd like to end with a little vort that it's interesting. When I say vort, it's nice, it's a joke, it's a gematria, but this is in the Rambam. The Rambam I can't take, so, it's not a little vort. It must be on a high level. So the Rambam, as you know, was a prolific writer and doctor. He wrote a halachic work called the Mishnah Torah. He wrote a Sefer HaMitzvot, counting all the mitzvot that he thought were the 613. And finally, he also wrote a Perush on the Mishnah. He also wrote the Moreh Nevuchim, a philosophical work. In the Perush of the Mishnah, he writes an introduction. We usually don't read introductions. We want to get to the book itself. But this introduction is sort of to the entire, what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. So the Rambam writes the following. If you look in the Mishnahs, there's 6 divisions of Mishnah, right? There's there's Ro'im, Moed, then there's Nashim, then there's Nezikin, Kachim, and Taharo. Those are the 6 subdivisions of the Mishnah, and then they're subdivided into tractates. Within Seder Nashim, we have something very, very strange. We have Yevamot, then we have Ktubot. So the Rambam asks, how come when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi got the Mishnahs together, he put Yevamot before Ktubot? Chronologically, how does it usually go? A husband and wife get married. If God forbid the husband dies and he didn't have a male son, then the wife has to go through either Yibum, namely marry the brother of her deceased husband, or Chalitza, which is that whole ceremony which absolves her from doing that, and then she can marry whoever she wants. Unfortunately, in this war, this happened a lot. People were killed and they had to go through Chalitza. In any case, chronologically, Ktubot, talking about a Ktubah, should come before Yevamot, because first you have to get married, and then if God forbid you die, the Yevamot thing comes into play. So how come in the Mishnahs, Yevamot comes before Ktubot? So listen to this. Indeed, Yevamot should have come after Ktubot, logically. Indeed, when you get married to a wife, it has to be from your full-fledged freedom of choice. You can't force someone to get married. You can't force neither the wife nor the husband to get married. What we said before, you can force a divorce sometimes, but you can't force a marriage. If you force a marriage, that marriage is not halachically valid at all. I say this, by the way, under every chuppah I do. I say to the husband, Mr. X, by virtue of the fact that you want to get married to Mrs. Y, and Mrs. Y, by virtue of the fact that you want to get married to Mr. X, that mutual decision coming out of your freedom of will create this marriage. If that doesn't happen, you're not married. So yes, we need a ring, we need two kosher edim, the husband has to say a certain sentence, but without free will, there's no marriage. So says the Rambam, indeed, Ktubot, symbolizing marriage, is totally up to the human being. Avala yibum kofim alav. But once, God forbid, the husband dies without a male child, it's not up to him if if his wife goes through yibum. It's actually against her will. She has to go through yibum or chalitza to get married again. Says the Rambam, Nachon yoter latchil b'davar hechechri lefika chidcha b'yevamot. Namely, when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi went ahead and made the Mishnahs, he says, a human being, a Jew, in the future will have to know. We educate them first to do. Like a little boy, a little girl, you don't start explaining to them why not to put the screwdriver in the socket. If a little boy or girl is about to put a screwdriver in the socket, you grab it out of their hands, against their will. And then they cry, they scream, and okay. 7 years later, you explain to them, this is made out of metal. Metal actually allows electricity to flow. It's very dangerous. You don't want to do that. If you do that, you get electrocuted. So says the Rambam, that's ultimately the order of how the Jewish people went way back when. That's the order we educate our children today. On the one hand, halacha is something that we have to do. But don't leave it at that. You have to explain, you have to critique, you have to ask questions, and you have to encourage questions. As a matter of fact, in the Seder, it's interesting, we said the Arami Oved Avi, if you recall, the second part of the Seder, and we basically darshaned all the psukim. Arami Oved Avi, Vayeret Mitzrayim, except for one. Arami Oved Avi. There's nothing in the Haggadah on those three words. Vayeret Mitzrayim, there's a whole Megillah. Right? All the psukim. But the first three words, Arami Oved Avi, nothing there. The Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Epstein, died at the beginning of the 20th century, Rabbi Yechiel Michael Epstein, who wrote the Aruch HaShulchan. He was a rabbi in Norvadik. He asks, how come we don't say anything about those three words? An Aramean played a trick on my forefather. Nothing. And he answers, the answer is the two words we say before. Say, ulmad. Go out and learn. Not everything has to be said at the Seder. It could be said 2 days later. So intentionally he left it out. That's what the Aruch HaShulchan says. But I love those two words, tzei, umad. And my whole life I've told people, after I've given a shir or whatnot, they say, how do you know these things? And my answer's always been, I'm not special. I was never a top student. Go out and learn it. There's Google today, there's many online lectures, better than this one. Go out and learn. You will get to the answers you're looking for. That's what God wants. When He gave us the Torah at Har Sinai, He wanted us to question. He wanted us to critique. He wanted us not to take things the way they are. As a matter of fact, that's the reason that He said, on Shavuos, bring chametz. In a general chametz-free society of the Beis HaMikdash, I want you to bring wheat, because wheat is the climax of a human being's food, and that, says the Rambam, is the most appropriate, suitable way for you to be a good Jew. Pesach is a yes or no sir holiday. Slaves. Shavuos is critique, ask, and whatnot. So how do we celebrate indeed Pesach? Night of Pesach comes. We do a lot of things. Some of them we understand, some of them we understand less. But basically we're following a script. We open the Haggadah and we're doing yes or no sir. How do we celebrate Shavuos? You learn. There's no script. Davening is short. Ma'ariv, that's it. Then it's up to you to learn and to go ahead and to say, I'm going to critique, I'm going to ask, I'm going to answer, I'm going to try to get an answer. If I don't, I'm going to ask other people. And eventually, that's the way God wanted us to celebrate Shavuos. He didn't want a bunch of yes men to do His Torah. And I think it's unfortunate that we're living in Israel and we're in Yerushalayim, and there's a segment of the Orthodox population, I won't say which, I'll just say they usually don't wear blue suits, and they basically believe that Judaism is only about barley. We have to listen to the Gedolim, and that's the whole Judaism. We don't think for ourselves, we don't have to think, it's usher to think to yourself. You have to go ahead and listen to the Gedolim. That's it. That's part of Judaism. That's the barley part. But it's not just Pesach. We connect it to Shavuos via the SEFIRAT-HAOMER, where God says, ask. I want you to know to ask, not to take things the way they are.
Think.
And to use your brain. There's one thing that God gave a human being that He didn't give animals, and that is a brain that allows him to speak, not just to make sounds, bark and meow. Speak. So therefore, I find it very objectionable that some people have summed up Judaism as a Pesach experience of yes sir, no sir. No chametz, yes matzah, do this, do that. Doesn't end there. We connect it to Shavuos, and eventually we get to Shavuos because God wanted us to ask, not just to leave things the way it is. Maybe that's the reason that between Pesach and Shavuos, there's another date in the Torah. If you look in the Torah, we got out of Egypt on Tet Vav of Nisan, 15th of Nisan. On Kaf Aleph Nisan, the 21st day of Nisan was Kriyat Yamsuf, Shvi Shel Pesach. And then it's a date 3 days later. Vayilchu shloshet yamim b'midbar v'lo matzu mayim. They went 3 days in the desert. They got to a place called Marah. There was water, but it was bitter. And then a whole miracle happened. And then it says, Sham sam lo chok u'mishpat v'sham nisau. God gave them there both chok u'mishpat. Chok means a mitzvah we don't understand. Rashi says paraduma. What's mishpat? A mitzvah we do understand. God was already trying to train them slowly. Now it's only 8 days, 9 days, 10 days, 11 days after you got out of Egypt. Start thinking not just about chukim. Think about mishpatim. And eventually when you get to Har Sinai, you're going to get the full gamut of chukim and mishpatim. To be a good Jew, you need barley, you need wheat. It's also, I do what God says, even if I don't understand it, but I don't leave it at that. I go a step further, and I ask why and how. And maybe I'm right, and maybe you're wrong, and maybe someone else is right, and maybe someone else is wrong. And the worst thing in the world you can do is to shut off your brain. And the even worse thing you can do, and with this I conclude, is not only shut off your brain, but actually stop advancing. Saying, I know what it means to do Pesach. I've done it 50 times. That's it for me. No, buy a new Agada. Maybe you'll find something you never saw before. The worst thing in the world is to rest on your laurels and to say, I'm done. Got nothing left. So therefore, I believe that's why these two holidays are sandwiched between barley and wheat to the extent that there's not even a date. Not even a name to Shavuos. God basically, I think, is hinting to us, you want to make a Shavuos, it's up to you. It's a holy day, 49th day, but it's up to you what you're going to learn. It's up to you to be a human being and to use all your abilities as a human being to question. And if you question, I believe your Judaism that you're doing anyway since Pesach, it's going to be enhanced.
If I